You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on January 22nd. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 234. Welcome to the 234th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I've got a special episode for you today. Today I have another installment of my fertility awareness reality series. And in today's episode, I'm actually interviewing one of my clients who I worked with earlier in the year. So it's a great episode because we actually she was part of my 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program back in January. I believe it was January of this year. Several months have passed since the program ended, and she's had the opportunity to really, jump into fertility awareness, continue charting, and continue discovering what she can learn about her, her health, just based on her charting. And so it's a really great interview, and it was a great opportunity also to just reconnect with her. So I'm excited to share that with you today. And of course, registration is open for the upcoming 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program, which will be taking place in January of 2019. And so I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program for more information and to apply. I'm only doing one group. We're going to be meeting on Tuesday evenings, 8:30 Eastern, and we're going to meet for 10 weeks straight, and it's going to be fantastic. And in the past year, whenever I've run these programs, the groups do tend to fill up. So if you are wanting to join us, then make sure to get in your application so that we can reserve your spot. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. Now let's jump into today's episode. And today I'm really excited to welcome my guest, Taq, to the show. I just had to look up when our session was, but Taq was part of the January Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program. And so I was really excited to connect with you again and do an on-air session because it's been a couple of months since we talked. So welcome to the show, Taq.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. And I mean, it's been a little while, but I would love to hear, and I'm sure the listeners would want to hear a little bit about kind of what brought you to this place with fertility awareness. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience, if you used hormonal birth control before, what your periods were like, if you would like to talk a little bit about that, and kind of what led you to start using fertility awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can start with the fact that I was on hormonal birth control for 7 years straight. And I grew up in Metro Vancouver in Canada and decided to go to school on the other side of the country in Halifax. And leaving my house was a pretty big deal because I'm Sikh Punjabi, I'm South Asian. And so that was a big step in terms of gaining some independence. So moved across the country and started having sex and being in relationships. And so I obviously, being someone who's educated, who's always been interested in sexuality and practicing safe sex, I needed to find a form of birth control because I didn't want to get pregnant at the time. And based on what I found, just as like an average young person, hormonal birth control, the pill seemed to be the best option because it was easy. You just take a pill every day and you don't have to worry about getting pregnant because, of course, at that time I had no idea that the fertile window existed and what my menstrual cycle was like. So anyways, long story short, 7 years later, I guess getting to know my body a little bit more and become more self-aware and body literate and just taking charge of my health, specifically my mental health. And I think that's where the pill affected me the most. was not necessarily in terms of physical health, but my mental health. And so I started going to see a therapist, and she actually recommended the book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility. And off I went. I think that's where a lot of people start. We picked up that book. I found your podcast and have been listening ever since, and have been spreading the word about the fertility awareness method as a form of body literacy and getting to know your body in a way that then can help you connect to your mental, spiritual, and emotional health.
That's amazing that your therapist introduced you to fertility awareness. I really like hearing stories like that, because I know it can come across sometimes like, we talk about health practitioners and how they don't always know, but some really do. So it's really nice to kind of honor and acknowledge when you have a positive experience like that.
For sure.
You touched on the effects that you experienced while taking hormonal birth control. Did you want to share a little bit? Because you mentioned that the effects were more kind of regarding your mental health.
Yeah. So what really did me in was actually feeling a very low libido. So it was that point where I was like, what? I used to have a lot of fun, and especially with my partner, and we would have a good time. And I think that seeing that effect, and therefore the effect of that on our relationship, became really apparent to me. And so I looked up the effects of birth control on libido, and listened to a few podcasts and read a few articles about that. And the research seems to very clearly show that it does actually decrease sex drive in folks with a uterus who are taking hormonal birth control. So that spiraled into thinking about the relationship between hormonal birth control and things like experiences of depression that I've had in the past, daily anxiety. And coming off of it, for the first month, I honestly kept just saying to people, look at how chill I am now. Aren't I so chill? And it was just such a very cool experience to go from being worried and anxious all the time to what I describe as being chill and being able to be in the present more, which I think is the big thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
I feel like when part of doing this work, and I mean, I've heard women express similar stories, as you know, from listening to the podcast as well. But I always feel the need to kind of highlight, because on the surface, it may not seem like that big of a deal, but that's like a day-to-day kind of predisposition that completely changed, which is a really big deal.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when people hear about hormonal birth control and the effects of it, they maybe think about it more directly with the physical changes to the menstrual cycle, because those are also apparent, and bone health and effects on nutrients. And maybe that doesn't necessarily, they might feel I feel fine in that regard, and not think about the consequences of it on other aspects of health, emotional, mental, spiritual. So yeah, I hope my story helps folks think about it in that way as well.
Well, and just one last question along these lines. So it sounds like you made the connection afterwards, though, because it was kind of like the libido thing was obvious to you, but then it was once you kind of started looking into that you thought about the other stuff. So while you were taking it, was it then that you made this connection, or was it kind of later on?
I think it was in the process of becoming educated about it. So I can't even remember. So Taking Charge of Your Fertility was my first, I guess, exposure to the fertility awareness method. And as a health researcher, I was nerded out so hard over that book. And then I very quickly listened to a lot of the podcasts that you have produced. And thank you so much for making the podcast. Honestly, I think it's changing lives and just sharing so much ancestral knowledge with people that we don't get in our formal education for the most part, or in mainstream society. So it was just a really quick period of education for me. So I'd read all of that book, listened to pretty much all of your podcasts. So all the links were kind of coming together at one time. But it's true that it wasn't until I actually stopped taking my last pill that I started to see the noticeable changes in my health.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I know even before we started recording, I was sharing with you, I mean, a lot of the stories I've shared on the podcast are of women who've had negative experiences with hormonal birth control. And then there's a lot of women who'll say, like, I was on it and I was totally fine. And, I do want to share more of those types of stories on the podcast in the future. But at the same time, we know that there are physiological changes that happen when you're on it. And the question I always have in the background is like, totally fine. But most of us don't even know what the side effects are to be looking for. So, okay, let's fast forward. So I know before we started the interview as well, you mentioned, so now it's almost been a full year since you came off of birth control. So you came off of it, was it like 10 months ago or 11 months ago?
December 2017.
Okay. And we are recording this in September of 2018. So you jumped off hormonal birth control, jumped into the class. So share with us just where you're at kind of currently with your fertility awareness, knowledge and confidence, and also what you want to make sure that we talk about in our session today.
Yeah, for sure. So as I said, I had done a lot of the background research on it and then actually learning the practice of charting. That was, I guess, a steep learning curve because there's so much in when you do all the research, it seems like there's so much to know and it's this very intense practice and you got to make sure that you do it right. But going through the course with you, I realized that it's more so just about building a habit, and it takes 21 days to build a habit. So if you try it for those 21 days, it kind of sticks. And then I know how to do it from then on. So I've been charting consistently, taking my temperature and observing my cervical mucus since that time in December. I guess the biggest struggles for me coming off of hormonal birth control were what medical professionals refer to as acne, but really it's the skin's natural detox process. So getting pimples, which according to North American patriarchal beauty standards are a blight on the site of society. Going through that unlearning process of being like, actually, my body is detoxing. I need to love it in all of its forms and just let it happen and support my detox organs as best as I can. So I stopped drinking caffeine. I was trying to not eat a lot of sugar. I started taking multivitamin and zinc and cod liver oil, which I still take every day, and just basically treating my body better, getting lots of sleep. The cardboard thing on the window, oh my gosh, that was revolutionary. Sleeping in the dark, doing all the things to support.
Sorry, for the listeners who are what the heck does she mean with the cardboard? Yes. But one of the things that we talked about in the group session was sleeping in the dark. And so you took that to heart. So tell us what you did with the cardboard.
Yeah. So I just have a giant piece of cardboard. I found it from I don't know, a refrigerator box or whatever. So it's just one big piece and I put it up on my window at night. I don't need to tape it or anything. It kind of just sticks there. And then I close my blinds over top and it makes my room pitch black so that I can't see my hand in front of my face. And my sleep has very much improved since then. So I sleep through the night, which wasn't always the case in the past, which just gives me more energy throughout the day. And I think is, been really helpful.
Well, and you know what my favorite part of that is? That you just did it with whatever. So that's one of the challenges because of course you want to make your apartment look super cute and you want to find the most perfect blackout blinds and blah, 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 blah. But really you just got to get on with it. And I love that you just did that.
Yeah. And then of course buy the perfect blackout blinds to put over top of it and cover it up.
Yes.
So people can't see it. But
I would imagine during the day it goes under the bed or something.
Yeah, it's true. Just charting doesn't take that much effort, and neither does doing these small things that just support the body reawakening the endocrine system after it being turned off for 7 years.
Oh, yes. Well, so Taq, let's jump into your chart. So I can see that you've been diligently charting. So I'm looking at, how many charts is this? I swear it's like 8 or 9 or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. So I actually chart, I take my temperatures on my phone on Kindara, and then I chart my cervical mucus. I have a little clipboard that I put next to my toilet, and I just use recycled paper and put it up, and then I chart my mucus that way. So I don't actually, I use the Justice app so that you and I can communicate. So just before our meetings, I then transcribe all that, but you don't have to do it.
Most people do
Nobody
that.
needs to do it. Oh, okay. Yeah.
You're not alone. Most people do it that way.
Yeah. So again, to your point about like, you don't really need a lot to make these changes. You can just use whatever to chart. Just try it.
Yes. And I love what you said about the habit part, because that's definitely what I try to kind of instill, like just kind of putting it out there, because it's like anything else. When you learn it at first, it seems really hard. But then as you experienced it yourself, but you also saw other women in the group. So like the first couple sessions are pretty information heavy and a little bit intense. But by the time we get midway through, and midway meaning that you already have typically one chart under your belt, by the time you get through the first chart, the second chart is so much easier. So by the time you finish the second chart, you're kind of good to go, especially within that context of having all the questions answered right away. So
yeah, for sure.
So let me know, Taq, what is kind of at the top of your mind for our session today? I know you sent me some information here, so I'm just looking at that as well.
Shall we scroll down to the next full chart? So I'm partway through a cycle. Maybe look at that one. Yeah, that's kind of a typical chart for me. I have my period, which is pretty light. I don't experience very much period pain. I've started steaming during my post-ovulatory period. My partner built me a vagina, that's what it's called, and it's amazing.
He built it for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's
fantastic.
I know, it's great. I am not even going to try and downplay it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So you were like, honey, can you build me, what did you call it? I mean, I would call it like a steam sauna, but you called it.
I called it a steam sauna, but I had originally planned to do it with a femme friend of mine who's a woodworker, and we were going to like start this side hustle after listening to the Steamy Chick podcast, but I didn't have time for that. You
didn't have time to start a side business making. No. What do you mean? You didn't? We all had. Who doesn't have time to?
Yeah, so it didn't happen, but then he took it as a hint and made it as a present for me.
Love it. Love it.
For an occasion. Yeah. So in terms of like my menstrual flow and cervical mucus, that's all going really well. It's very clear what my fertile window is. The issue that I'm having right now that I'm trying to figure out is that my temperatures are just low. So pre-ovulatory, like 36.1 to 36.3 or so is the average. And I find that I'm pretty cold just in general and like have a hard time putting on weight. And so that's an area of focus that I've just been directing my attention to in terms of where I can improve. So I had gone to get my thyroid tested, and that I tried to go through the Canadian healthcare system, the basic healthcare system, and they were just able to test my TSH, which came back normal. And then I went to go see a naturopathic doctor and ended up just paying for some of the tests. And they came back for the most part within range. Her only suggestion to me was to decrease stress in my life and to eat foods that support my thyroid function. So that's going to be my focus for the next while, is figuring out how to decrease stress, which I think means saying no to doing things. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't know. I have just been talking for a while. What are your thoughts or insights?
I'm just taking a look at what you sent over. I have this massive textbook here that highlights some of the normal ranges, which is what, just in case you're wondering what I'm looking at. But so yeah, TSH is within range. Your free T4 is within range. So the range that I have listed here that's optimal. Actually, no, your free T4, according to this book, is lower. So the optimal range I have here is 16.7 to 23.2, the same measurement there.
You said free T4?
Yeah, free T4. So yours is...
Can you remind me again the relationship between free and like binded? I forget.
There's the bound and unbound versions. So there's like the total and then the unbound. So the unbound is what's available to your body. So that's why they want to look at that to see if, because that's what can actually make a difference. So just the kind of the main difference between T4 and T3. So these are thyroid hormones, but your thyroid primarily produces T4. T4 is referred to as a pro-hormone or even a storage hormone. So it's kind of like T4 circulates around, but when your body needs energy, when your metabolism needs to increase, there's different parts of your body. So a lot of the T3 is produced peripherally, so not necessarily directly from your thyroid. And so what happens is you have these enzymes that do the conversion from T4 to T3. So T3 is not as abundant. You have way more T4 than T3, but T3 is the active hormone that actually gets into your cells and changes your metabolism. So then you get a sense of like, okay, the T4 is the pro-hormone. That's what my body, like it's kind of like its storage. But then when I need to get the energy into my cells, my body would do that conversion so that I get the T3, which is what actually increases your metabolism.
Okay.
So based
that my free, go ahead.
Okay. So based on, it's very challenging, as I'm sure you realize, because there's different ranges. So especially with thyroid, if you go to your regular doctor, the lab range tends to be quite broad. So even when I look at your lab range, the TSH, the normal is between 0.32 and 5.04, which is a pretty big range. But if you were to work with a different practitioner, say a functional practitioner or a fertility specialist, I know you're not currently, well, my understanding at least is that you're not currently trying to conceive. So if you were and you're working with a fertility specialist, they are going to have a different range because there's a completely different range that's optimal for trying to conceive in pregnancy.
Yes. And that's what my naturopathic doctor also said was like, it's a larger issue if I'm trying to get pregnant, which I am.
But then the question is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, is it really? So I only need to be healthy when I'm trying to make another human being, like not just when it's just me.
Exactly.
So
that's a really good point.
So, I mean, right there, you can see like depending on the doctor you go to, even different lab ranges are considered, which makes this issue really complex.
It does. And it really like flips the idea of these like clinical standards on their head a little bit.
Well, it doesn't make sense that you're totally fine until you're sick. I mean, I call that one out and say, no, that does not make sense. You're not totally fine until you're sick. So do we have to wait until you're sick to do anything? I mean, that's a bigger question. And really that's a question for a health practitioner that specializes in that area. And so that's why I'm always talking about on the podcast where there's lots of health practitioners that are amazing, but when you have a specific concern that you're worried about, you want to do your best to see if you're able to find somebody who specializes in that issue and has a really clear sense of it, but also aligns with your kind of views on health and how you want to be treated. Because you get better results if you work with someone who, like, this is what they do day in, day out. They specialize in it. They understand the difference between the lab ranges that your doctor might give you and the optimal ranges for optimal health. And you know what I'm saying? It's just a different level of care.
I agree. And I think that it speaks to the difficulty of finding someone like that.
Yes.
The fact, like, I've gone through, I guess now it's been like 3 different folks. And I live in Canada where apparently healthcare is very accessible and awesome, which is, I'm not saying that it's not,
it is.
But I'm saying it's not like, we can't just be like passive receivers. It's like taking your own health into your hands and having the agency to go and say, this is working and this is not working, and not necessarily thinking that just because someone is a health professional that they know more about your body than you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We haven't even addressed the fact that, okay, so when I look at your charts, what I'm seeing here, so go back to, so this was possibly one of your first charts when you came off birth control. This is December of last year. Okay, so if I go to January of last year, I see that there has been a little bit of a shift with regards to your temperatures, but back in January, your temperatures were extremely low. So off the chart in terms of, so like the chart that I use here, the bottom of the chart is about 36 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
So to put it into perspective, like healthy, normal temperatures would be in the range of 36.4 degrees Celsius and above. Mm-hmm. And so in your first chart of January, we're seeing your basal body temperatures in your pre-ovulatory phase. Many of them are under 36.
Yeah.
So
low.
Super low. And then we're seeing also the next chart that I have here, and that was also a bit of a longer cycle, was it? No, I see what's going on. It was the end of January. Okay, and then we have April, and again, they were quite low. May, a little bit of an improvement, but we're still seeing low. So even bringing us to now, they're not as low as they were. So we have to kind of acknowledge that something is different because before they were, like we had several that were kind of below 36.
Yeah.
So now they're a little bit, there's definitely an improvement from then to now, but we're not really seeing pre-ovulatory temperatures that are ever higher than 36.4.
No.
So I think one of the things that's important is that, regardless of what a lab test says, if you're constantly running low, like if your actual metabolism is low and your actual body temperature is always colder than it needs to be, clearly what we're seeing here is a pattern. It does mean that it's low. Like taking your actual temperature first thing in the morning is a legitimate marker of your metabolism. So regardless of what the test says, we still have this low body temperature thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's kind of difficult for me to wrap my head around it because from what I understand, low metabolism means like you're tired, you don't have you have the opposite problem with me, which is like putting on weight that you don't necessarily want, even though all bodies are lovely. But if it's like beyond what is good for your like bone structure and your body. But I'm having the opposite problem where my temps are low, but I don't fit into that standard. Like I'm quite thin and I'm having a hard time putting on weight.
Well, so something just to put out there, I mean, because it's so interesting. You were talking about your PhD topic thesis before our call, and because I was nosy and I wanted to know, but I would love to kind of dive in another life, right? Because I've got enough going on, but I would love to dive into the complexities of the way that medicine looks at weight. So how it treats patients differently based on weight, how medical theory, because I've read a few, like it's very interesting how weight is looked at in research studies and with regards to various illnesses. And I guess I'm just kind of, that's a little bit of a tangent, but if a person has like low metabolism, a thyroid issue, it's not necessarily that they're going to start out obese and depressed, right? I mean, these types of issues can kind of slowly get worse over, multiple years or even a decade or more.
Right.
So, I think like this is, like I said, like I feel like in your case, what I would really encourage you to do if possible. So this is, it's hard and it's a lot of work and it's super annoying. And I also talked about this in one of the episodes I released recently in my interview with my on-air client session with Daisy, because in that session, we really talked about, picking a practitioner and not getting too dejected if you have if you have an experience that isn't so great. Right. But I recognize that it's not always possible to go to 5 different practitioners because they all cost money. And this is like, obviously it's just, but in your case, you do live in a larger center. And so if it's possible to, spend half an hour doing some research, like finding out who are the rock stars in your city who specialize in thyroid from a functional perspective. See if, unfortunately, I know you're not trying to conceive, see if they focus on thyroid for fertility, because then maybe they know more about it specifically as it relates to women. Right. And kind of like do your research, see if you can like do a short list of 5 names and see if they have any resources available. A lot of, practitioners now, they'll have their own website and they'll put up some blog posts, and you'll be able to at least get a sense of their orientation, the way that they practice, and who they serve,
Right.
Because I feel like a little bit of additional support could be useful, because like I said, I feel like, and especially if you were able to find somebody who understands the role and the connection between like body temperature, metabolism. And I'm sure you've listened to this episode, but I'm going to assign you this homework because I think new things will pop out to you after our call. Episode 124 with David Brownstein and Dr. Dennis Wilson, because that's what they specialize in. Largely thyroid, especially Dr. Wilson, because he's coined it Wilson's T3 syndrome, when you have, normal labs, but your temps are super low, and he talks about why that happens.
Yeah, I feel like everything else is fine except for feeling cold. Like that's the part that's drawing me to want to pursue it further, which seems like a small thing, like, oh, just put on a sweater. But I feel like it's deeper than that and is following my intuition. I think I agree that I just need to pursue this further in terms of how to find natural ways, at least start with natural ways to support my thyroid function, maybe getting my nutrients tested, taking more different vitamins at different doses, and then also like eating whole foods that contain those nutrients, and then potentially seeing or hearing the suggestion of taking some kind of pharmaceutical or some kind of herbal combination that might support function. I guess we'll have to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's where it's invaluable to have a practitioner who specializes in this, because thyroid disorders are super complex. So
no, for sure. All right. Well, I think I have my to-do list.
And clear. In terms of your charting and everything, where are you at with everything?
Yeah, charting is going well. Just continuing to maintain it. I think that sometimes we tend to just like stay in the mind a lot, and like, we go to work, we get our Netflix in, we do other things, converse with friends, stay in the mind a lot, and sometimes don't turn towards the body enough. So charting is kind of like a daily way for me to recognize and support and love my body.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a theme that kind of comes out once you pass how does all this work? Where do I put the thing on the chart? And really get into just the broader meaning of it. Because in sometimes I think to myself, like, it's so like because I think it's so profound, and I feel like it, in my life it made such a big difference, and I know a lot of women share that sentiment. But I feel like for someone who was listening to this for the first time or just discovering it, I could totally see them thinking like, well, how could like writing about your cervical mucus make such a big difference?
Yeah, I know, but it does. Like I tell now every day, every time I get my period, I tell it that I love it. Whereas before it was like, oh, my period, oh man, but. Which is like a huge shift to be able to like love our bodies in this way in a world that isn't cut out for supporting it. Like even just taking the time out of our days to cook nutritious foods for ourselves, to be able to go and do this research on health practitioners and go and see them. There's not always space for that to happen, but it's important to carve out that space, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so as we bring our session to a close today, if there's a woman who's listening and, maybe she's somewhere on her journey, she's trying to decide if fertility awareness might be right for her. Maybe she's scared to take the leap. You took the leap. Maybe you could share some words of wisdom of how you got your head around it. Like, how did you take that jump from coming off of hormonal birth control to using fertility awareness? Yeah,
it did. After having taken something every single day for 7 years, it did seem like it was going to be this big, scary moment. But in fact, all it meant was I didn't go and get my prescription. I didn't pick up my prescription. I didn't take the pill. And I went from there. So regardless of people's gender identity, the idea of that you have to take hormones in order to regulate your body is not in fact true, because they're not really hormones. It's just some thing that science has produced to trick our bodies into thinking that it can keep functioning this way. So I encourage you to see what it's like for your body just to be all natural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's so interesting what happens when you just kind of like watch your body and see what it does.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't have to think about it as a lifelong commitment, but just like try it for one cycle, see what happens, see if you like it. And if you see any differences, there's no stopping you from going back on the pill. Everything is your choice. Everything is our choice, but it's, I guess, more of a leap towards getting to know your body and getting to know this ancestral knowledge of fertility awareness that's been passed down through thousands of years, and having the opportunity to explore what that means.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if someone is thinking about jumping in and taking a class, kind of wondering like, is it worth it to actually go through, take the time to actually do it this way? What would you want to tell her?
Yeah, I think that as we were talking about before we started recording, life can get so busy. So when you are learning something new, when I'm learning something new, it's helpful just to be in a group, dedicate some time, and work with an instructor who knows what they're talking about, which is you. Thanks, Lisa, for sharing the knowledge with me. So that was really helpful, just to have like a time that we met every week. And it was a reminder for me to do the activity and the learning that I needed to do beforehand. And after, I think it was 10 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So after that 10 weeks, I felt pretty confident and I was good to go. And I've been successfully charting ever since. And then also, as we talked about in this podcast, getting to know the ways that I can support my body better.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Well, thank you so much for being here, Taq. As always, it's such a pleasure to chat with you. It was really nice to catch up, because I'm pretty sure it's been about, I don't know if it's been a full 6 months, but I feel like it's been about that since we last had an opportunity to talk in person. So, well, you're not physically here, but like we're looking at each other. Virtually in person. Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/234. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Taq. Today's episode, I feel like it's a great example of how your cycle can be instrumental in identifying various just abnormalities, how your cycle does shift when you are seeing something. And it's really interesting, because what I always say to my clients is that if you have an occasional one-off or something that kind of comes up in your cycle once, then that's typically not something that we're going to be concerned about. There's a real temptation when you start charting your cycles to look for problems and assume that if everything isn't just textbook, glossy, perfect, in terms of how charts look in textbooks and different resources, then it's really easy to get overwhelmed and to make all of these assumptions that there must be something, terribly wrong. And so I always really try to stress that we can't, your cycle is always giving information back to you. And when there is a health issue present, you will see it there. And what is the difference, kind of that differentiating factor, is that if you actually do have like a legitimate endocrine disorder or a thyroid issue, or if you have polycystic ovary syndrome, or if you have some sort of like systemic gut issue or something like that, like if you actually have a health problem, then what you would see in your charts isn't just like a one-off. You would see a pattern of disrupted cycles, and you would see that pattern persist until that health issue is addressed. And so, I mean, in Taq's case, she's seeing low temperatures, and we talked about some of the reasons that they were there. But ultimately, when you have a health issue, it's really important to seek support from a health practitioner who specializes in that area. And so, part of the challenge is just identifying what the problem is and narrowing it down and really, getting support from a health practitioner to get that diagnosis and so that you know what you're dealing with. But then the second part of it is also challenging because once you know what's going on, again, you still need to find a healthcare practitioner then who specializes in that issue specifically and who can help to support you in the ways that you wish to be supported. And so there's a lot of different paradigms. There's a lot of different types of healthcare services that we can seek. And so many women that I work with are really seeking someone to help them identify the root cause. For many of the women I work with, they want to know why. It's not just that they want, a pill and to be sent away. They want to know, well, why am I seeing this parameter that's out of alignment in my cycle? Why am I seeing this consistent trend of, whatever it is? And what does it mean? What is it representing? What is the health issue that could possibly be causing this? And then if we identify what that is, then what can we actually do to address that root cause instead of just jumping in and taking medication? In some cases, that's not warranted. With thyroid conditions in particular, I think it's really important to just recognize that often women with thyroid conditions need medication. So it's really important to have that support of a trained practitioner and to kind of not make those types of assumptions. So with thyroid is really tricky and complicated to address. And there's some disagreement among different healthcare practitioners about what the best and optimal way of treating it is. And so again, trying to find that person that really specializes in it and will be looking at your thyroid in the way that you wish to be looked at. So if you wish somebody to be looking into your thyroid and the underlying factors that could be contributing to it, if it's not functioning normally, then you're going to have to consider a functional practitioner in addition to your medical doctor, someone who, in addition to just doing the lab tests and prescribing medication, is also willing to look at some of those underlying factors that contribute to thyroid dysfunction. So with that said, I hope that you did enjoy today's episode. And if you're at that place where you are either contemplating using fertility awareness as your primary birth control, or if you've been charting your cycles for a while and you're starting to see certain patterns that you don't fully understand, or you've gotten to a place where you kind of get it, but you don't really feel that confident, then I encourage you to jump in and join the 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program that's coming up in January this year. And that is the program where I take a small group of women through 10 weeks of fertility awareness charting. We really hammer down the basics. We get you sorted out with cervical mucus charting, basal body temperature, cervical position. I've been doing this for a long time. And so when you go through the program, you benefit from all of those years of experience just in terms of charting and supporting women. So there's a lot of really specific things you can do to clarify it. Mucus is typically one of the most challenging things for my clients, but we really nail that down within the first couple of sessions. And then there's a lot of nuances when it comes to temperature and then cervical position. Once we get the mucus out of the way, cervical position is kind of like the second biggest challenge for most of my clients. But again, there's a lot of specific strategies that you can employ to get that down so that by the time that you reach the end of the program, you can feel really confident in your ability to define your fertile window, to understand the rules, so that there's no guessing, there's no question as to when you're fertile, when you're not, and what to do when you're unsure. We really go through all of that. And also, regardless, what you're seeing on your chart, whether there's any indications of underlying health challenges, we go through that as well. So just to give you that full sense of not only the charting aspect and feeling really confident, for instance, if you're trying to conceive and you're not really sure exactly how that timing works, to really get that down. But also, if you're concerned about other, what could your chart be saying about your overall health, we really go into that as well. So great program. The 10-week period allows you not only to really learn and have that full opportunity to get all of your questions answered, but it gives you the opportunity to chart your cycle for about 3 months, just under 3 months, which gives you the opportunity not just to learn, but to really put it into practice. So again, the link is fertilityfriday.com/group program. And I would love to have you in there in our January program. So I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today and for listening to this podcast, for sharing the show with your friends. This podcast has grown so much since I started about 4 years ago, and it's because of you. It's because of listeners like you who are sharing this episode and this podcast with your friends, your family. I know some practitioners listen and you share the episodes with your patients, and I really appreciate that because ultimately that's how we're going to get the word out about fertility awareness so that we can really I'm just looking forward to seeing that shift in our culture as we really start to recognize the importance of healthy menstrual cycles with regular ovulation, and to recognize that it's not just about having babies. Are we allowed to be healthy? Like, can we be healthy just for healthiness sake? Does my cycle only matter when I'm trying to have a baby? Absolutely not. It matters because having healthy, regular ovulatory menstrual cycles is a sign of health, and we all want to be healthy, so we all deserve to have healthy menstrual cycles. And I feel like those are good words to end on. So with that said, thank you for listening. Have an awesome week or weekend whenever you're listening to this episode, and as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.